And then I would like to introduce our speakers. In person, we have Dr. Pam Savage-Knepshield. She is employed by CACI International as the User-Centered Design Lead for Army Field Artillery Command and Control Systems supporting the U.S. Army Project Manager Mission Command in Aberdeen Proving Ground, Maryland. She has a doctorate degree in cognitive psychology and is a fellows of the Human Factor and Ergonomics Society. With over 30 years of human factors experience working in industry, academia, and the U.S. Army, her interests focus on user-centric design, from front-end development, identifying user needs, and translating them into user stories throughout usability testing and post-fielding user satisfaction assessment. And so our online instructor is Dr. Judi See. She is a system analyst and a humans factor engineer at Sandia National Laboratories in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Her work involves leading research and analysis focused on the human component of the nuclear deterrence system. Dr. See has a doctorate degree in human factors, a master's degree in human factors and system engineering, and professional certificate in human factors and ergonomics through the board certification in professional ergonomics. She became a distinguished member of the technical staff at Sandia National Laboratories in 2021. Her research interest includes vigilance, signal detection theory, visual inspection, and human readiness levels. So now I would like to introduce or have Dr. Pam Savage-Knepshield come up, and she will present her.
Okay, so welcome everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, good. Here's our rough agenda for today. I will cover user-centered design first, then usability testing after the break. We'll have lunch, we'll come back, and then Dr. See will cover understanding and applying human readiness levels. Then I'll present a real-world use case from my work with the Army, and then we'll have a break, and then we'll do group exercises. When we do the group exercises, you might want to pick somebody to report out what your findings were, and then we can have a general discussion. And also, we're always looking for ways to improve what we do. This started out as just providing the workshop on human readiness levels, but it was only half day. So Ida asked me, can you fill a whole day? And I was like, okay. So that's why we're starting off with user-centered design, usability, and then going to HRLs. And you will see, I hope, that user-centered design and human readiness levels kind of go hand in hand, and human readiness levels actually provide a really well-structured framework for conducting user-centered design. All right. You should have all downloaded the short course prep packet, but don't be alarmed if you didn't, because I printed out copies and they're up on the table over here, so you can help yourself to one of them, during break before we get to that section of the day. So I just want to welcome you all. You're from a lot of different places. I know I haven't had a chance to go around and meet everyone, but I did meet some of you. And I'm just wondering, we don't have time really for in-depth, introductions right now as a group, but I'm wondering how many of you have actually have user-centered design experience, for the show of hands. Okay, and how about usability testing? Yay, all right. And how about human system integration? Okay, very good. And experience applying the human readiness levels. Okay, all right. I'll share a little bit about my background in a minute. So today, part one, user-centered design in the system acquisition process. And that is the framework and where I've worked for the whole time that I've worked for the Army. And I say I work for the Army because I just retired on Halloween. And then the next day I came back as a contractor to my same exact job. Luckily, I was the most qualified candidate, thankfully. So I'm still feel like I'm still Army. I'm in the same job, so it doesn't feel any different to me. Learning objective number 1 during this part of our course is to understand the relationship between human systems integration, which is HSI, and user-centered design, UCD. When I do user-centered design, I call it soldier-centered design, SCD. You could call it human-centered design, warfighter-centered design, just whatever your user group is, you can hone in and call it that. And then, of course, the Human Readiness Level Scale, HRL. And like I mentioned already, UCD is really foundational to the application of the Human Readiness Level Scale. So for this section, I'll talk about our roles in system design, the 3 guiding principles that I use, Army HSI, user-centered design. I will talk about a career-defining HSI acquisition experience I had when I first started with the Army. And then I'll describe a sampling of user-centered design activities. And then finally, I'll close with some lessons learned. And these photos illustrate, just some of why I love my job. I get to work with soldiers. I get to work with new cutting-edge technology. And I work to make it more useful and usable. And so here I am with my team, even though they're not pictured, you'll see them later on in some pictures, conducting usability testing with early engineering software release of the Precision Fires mounted system. So I actually have a Precision Fires dismounted system with me today. When we get to the usability section, I'll pass that around along with the a card that we use for giving an overview, and I'll let you have a chance to see what it's like to use that. And don't worry, it's unclassified, this version. All right. So our roles are really critical. All of us here, in some form or fashion, we are the ones who shape how people learn, how they accomplish their goals, how they connect with each other, how will they achieve readiness, and how effective they will be in combat. So that is why it is so important to me to bring my team with me whenever we go out and conduct soldier touch points. So here you can see somebody from the Army Capability Manager Fire Cells Targeting Office out with us doing a DevOps exercise with the 25th ID. You see one of the software developers, and then you see our system engineer, one of our system engineers. So bring them all out and let them have face-to-face interaction with the soldier and the equipment that they've worked on. So about 3 years ago, PEOC3T, who was then Major General Collins, he asked me to explain to him why my practice of HSI is so successful in my program shop. I'd never really thought of it that way. I'm just doing my job and I want to do it well, right? And so I came up with this briefing. And then basically this is, some of what makes me successful. These 3 things, I think, are what contributes to that. So I see myself doing HSI as on the bridge between the acquisition community and my end users, who are typically soldiers, but not always. Depends on the program. And what I've found is for me to have an impact, I have to focus on the soldier, be soldier-centric, include everybody, my stakeholders, my acquisition community, in all of my soldier touch points. So that's community inclusivity. And I have to be there early, often, and throughout, right? So the whole life cycle totality. So Army Human Systems Integration really is a program that ensures the soldier is the central consideration, right? So already I'm working toward a program that already says the soldier is important, the user is important, and they are the focus. So user-centered design just makes sense that that's the way I implement HSI. HSI's goals are to optimize total system performance, reduce life cycle costs, minimize risk to soldier loss or injury, and to reduce the training burden and reliance on external support. Now, for me, this becomes very important, this last one, because in Project Manager Mission Command, we are no longer wanting to provide new equipment training. We have lost our FSRs. Now they're trying to they want to cut new equipment training. So now it's going to become very important that our systems are intuitive. And how are we going to really achieve that and guarantee that they're not only intuitive, but then how about if we provide job aids, the tech manual, the quick reference guide, all of those product support documents. We also have to make sure those are easy to use and enable soldiers to be able to complete their mission, their tasks. Now, for HSI, there is guidance in DODI 5000.95 and in Army Regulations 602-2, which is human systems integration in the system acquisition process. And these green check marks indicate the things that they say the product manager needs to do. So when I look at my product manager, which is Fire Support Command and Control, I say, okay, you needed to plan for and implement HSI early in the acquisition process and throughout the product life cycle. Okay, I'm there, and that's what I'm doing. Now, I do that, and I create an HSI plan, which communicates to everyone what we are going to do in support of those goals of the Army HSI program. When these programs require DOT&E oversight, they actually have to approve those plans. So I have 2 programs that are about to become under DOT&E oversight. So, and I am, redoing all my HSI plans right now for all my programs because you're supposed to update them yearly. So that's what I'm doing. And these 2 programs are MVPs, minimum product, MVP, minimum viable products was what we're working on. So that's another interesting new thing for me. So they have to implement a proactive HSI program for all the systems and have a human engineering design approach, which is UCD, is the human engineering design approach that I use to meet this goal. And then they have to exercise managerial control over me, which is no easy task, they tell me. All right. So for HSI, there are 7 domains: manpower, number of people that are to operate, maintain, and sustain that piece of equipment or that system. The personnel, what are their knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need in order to perform the job. Human factors engineering, that's where we're integrating design criteria, psychological principles, human behavior into the system design. And training, it's the learning, how they learn how to use the system. Safety and occupational health, we're looking at minimizing the risk of accidents and mishaps that cause death and injury to operators and also to the system. Force protection and survivability, we're looking at reducing the risk of fratricide and the probability of being detected, and habitability. So here we're looking at personnel needs that are dependent on the physical environment. So working conditions, berthing, hygiene, things of that nature. So now what I've done is I've taken some examples. For each one of these domains, I have a question that we might want to answer considering that domain. And so for my systems, they're primarily software, although they are on hardware platforms, and I'll address that in a minute. So for manpower, I might want to ask, is more than one soldier required to operate the system, right? Right now, it's one soldier for all our legacy systems or currently fielded systems, so we need to keep it to 1. Personnel, are the soldiers able to operate the software with their current skill set? Can soldiers use, for HFE, can soldiers use the software to perform their job duties? Does it align with field artillery doctrine, which we find is important, right? For many reasons. I'll give you one example, is that for this precision fires dismounted system, when we brought it out for that DevOps exercise, we were asking soldiers to use it to perform some of their fire mission processing procedures. And lo and behold, the menus weren't organized how they had memorized them in advanced individual training. So they used a lot of mnemonic techniques, like we use Mr. Smith for external validity or for validity. So when they didn't match up, they did not like that, and we had to rearrange the menus. Training is software so complex that it'll require extensive training to learn. And how does the software handle unexpected values during data entry? So for safety, you can imagine if you put a 0 somewhere, is the system going to blow up? Because you have to look at all those values and how are they going to impact the system. Force protection and survivability. Does the software induce fratricide by displaying inaccurate position, location information? And habitability. Software only, right? So, however, all of our software goes on platforms. Precision Fire Mounted goes in Bradley BFIST, Bradley Fighting, Fire, never mind, BFIST, and the Stryker Fire Support Vehicle. So we always have to look at that because it will impact, even though we're software only, it will impact. And when we find any issues that are applicable to one of those platforms, we share them with that PM. So now I'm going to just transition and say a little bit about me. So most of my career, I've been a human factors engineer. I've been called many things, some of them nice, like a UX researcher, a UI designer, a human factors engineer, a research psychologist, all depending on where I work is what title they give me. Okay, so I worked 29 years at Bell Labs. I began there as a key punch operator. And before I retired, well, when I retired, I was a distinguished member of technical staff. And along the way, from all those jobs I had, I ended up in a human factors group. And so that's how I found human factors. And I grew up there on user-centered design. They used usability to be their competitive advantage. They had found through market research that indeed customers' willingness to pay was 20% greater if you could give them a usable product. So my job was pretty easy. Everybody wanted to make our product better and sell more so we could make more money, right? So that was pretty easy to justify. You know, a lot of people talk about cost justify what you do. What's the return on investment of doing usability? So when I came to the Army, my goal was to take what I learned in industry and apply it to the military. It was a little bit of a rude awakening because it's not the way I was used to working at all. You know, I was a team member. We did everything together. We were just one group of people responsible for the whole product from, inception through delivery. Now I'm this person out here on this team providing support to vendors and to program offices, and I'm trying to get everybody together. It was totally a little bit of a shock to me. So you can see here in the top picture, I spent 6 months in Iraq as a science advisor and doing focus groups, going around. It was a wonderful experience. If anybody has an opportunity to do that, I highly recommend it. I was able to walk up to soldiers no matter where they were and talk to them and ask them what problems they were having with their equipment. Was there anything we could do for them? And then the idea there was that I would write them up as requests for information, send it back. Back then it was called RECOM, not DevCom. And the RDEX would come up with solutions. They'd field them to us, we'd field them to the soldiers, and then we'd get feedback. So it was a really great experience where I could really apply my human factors right there in the field. That's another briefing, though. Then you can see me down at NTC with my job doing observational studies. I spent a month at NTC, a month in South Korea, a week in Japan. So going around to the different units and finding out what their needs are, the requirements for our systems. And then finally, usability testing. And you can see here all the different organizations I've worked for. I'm up at CACI at the top now. And I've worked for a lot of PM shops, tactical radios, military GPS, a lot of command and control systems, intel, quite a variety. When you get to work for the Army, and that's another nice thing about this job, is that you do have that breadth of experience that you can have working on these different systems. HSI, practitioner roles and responsibilities. So one of my responsibilities when I was an Army civilian was to develop funding and resourcing requirements for HSI. So when I was in DevCom AC, we were all responsible for finding our own work. We were 100% customer reimbursable. So very, very important that you do a good job if you want to keep getting hired, right? Which is really true for everyone, but a little bit more so when you have to find your own work. Yes, I crosswalk HSI performance parameters and objectives throughout the CDD, CPD, and all of those documents. But I find where I spend most of my time is at the system subsystem specifications, or the SSS, and working on software requirements. And I also write an HSI section for the TEMP, the Test and Evaluation Master Plan. Let's see. I maintain an HSI tracker, which is a companion document to the HSI plan. And I'll discuss more about that on the next slide. Also, okay, sorry about that. And I prepare HSI assessments. So let's talk a little bit about those. So the HSI plan really describes how I'm going to include the soldier in our design and development process. So over on the right, you can see I have an introduction. I talk about Army HSI. I talk about the human readiness level scale, and I'll talk more about that in a minute too. I provide a really brief system description, and I talk about what who my target users are, and I describe them and their capabilities. Then I talk about our UCD design process, what activities we're going to conduct. So UCD activities synonymous with soldier touch points. And then I talk about some of our deliverables. I talk about our usability metrics and how we're going to work through when we identify usability issues and enhancements. What is the process that we're going to work through to vet them and to actually get them implemented and added to the backlog in our Agile development process. And then in the appendices, we'll have sample data collection materials. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time I'm redoing my HSI plans for all my programs, and I'm actually going to include all of my HRL data, including that I've used that answers the HRL supporting questions. And you'll see some of those examples later on this afternoon, how I could present that potentially. But I am going to include that in my plan, because some activities we have already performed. All right. What happens in this HSI tracker is every time we go out and collect soldier feedback, I write down what the issues are or the enhancements. We will vet them as a team, right? And then hopefully the ones that we've said have determined that we will go forward with, we make design changes, and design changes aren't anything that adds additional work or any of that, because it's just part of an iterative agile design process. So we will make those changes, and I track them, and then I retest them once they're implemented. Now, right before major milestone reviews, I will look at that tracker and I will say, okay, what are the outstanding issues that we didn't take care of yet? Those are the ones that are going to go into my domain assessment for human factors engineering. Okay. Then we take, I take the assessments from safety and from health hazards and survivability. So we all have our little domain assessments. I consolidate all that information into one HSI assessment. And the assessment is predominantly a table of all the issues, what their current status is, and if there are mitigation plans. and, what's in the works, and when do you think they might get fixed, if they're going to get fixed. Just so the Milestone Decision Authority will know where he stands with this program, if he's going to say, yes, I want to, give this a full material release, for example. And if you have any questions, just let me know. All right, the HSI plan and assessment. So one of the most important things, right, is to have metrics, right? Without my usability measures and my metrics, I would not know where I am, if I'm achieving what I want or not, right? So these are the ones that I have come up with, and we pretty much apply them consistently throughout my field element that I was part of. We all use these same metrics, and as well as other contractors at APG also use them. So we're trying to standardize this. So for effectiveness, we expect 85% of the users to be able to complete tasks on the first attempt without any training. I think this is my most important one, because if people can do that, the odds are once that software or that system gets fielded, most people will be able to use it without training. Training effectiveness, 85 is already pretty high, right? So I just raise it up to 90%. So if 90% of the users have to be able to complete tasks on the first attempt after they have new equipment training or after they use embedded training. User satisfaction, we're looking at 85% of the users rate ease of use acceptable. I use a 4-point rating scale, so that would be a rating of 4 or 5. I want 85% 4s and 5s. For cognitive workload, there too, 85% rate cognitive workload acceptable. And I'll talk about this later on, but I use a modified Cooper-Harper cognitive workload rating scale. For efficiency, 85% of the users complete tasks within time standards when we have them. Not all tasks have time standards, but some of ours do. And 85% of the users complete tasks within accuracy standards. Some of our tasks also have that. So those. Then we benchmark our performance against industry standards. So here we're using the SUS, the System Usability Scale, and the TAM, the Technology Acceptance Model. For the SUS, we're looking for a mean score greater than or equal to 80, which is pretty high, right, when you consider that Apple apps usually get about a 68. And the mean TAM rating, greater than or equal to a 5.5 on a 7-point scale. Yes.
All right. Yeah, okay. Assuming you're doing some of this analysis early in development versus, say, operational testing, when you get to operational testing and those users are doing their mission, I assume, depending on the nuances of the mission, they may be task saturated with other activities. So how do you evaluate those in a meaningful operational way early on? Because if you're just giving them one thing to focus on and that's not what their real life's going to be like, is the measure really meaningful?
Yeah, so you're right. So in the beginning, you're doing a lot of. Yes, in the beginning, we're doing part testing, right? We're doing it in an operational scenario, so it makes sense to do it that way. But you're right, we don't have task saturation. And so as we progress, right, as the system evolves and becomes more mature, so does our testing, right? And so we did do a DevOps, and that was a chance to get out in the field. And I'm going to talk about this later, but that's okay. The ITN radios, the integrated tactical network radios, they were just all prototypes. We had them come along with us to Hawaii, and that's where it was. I didn't choose it. And we actually ran them through the paces there. So they were more operationally realistic scenarios out in the field with everything else going on. So it's a process that you have to keep evolving. And a lot of times I don't ever get to see the system really in its, in its realistic mode, how it's really going to be used until we get to an operational test, which is why I love to go to them. And I love to collect data at them.
Thank you.
Okay, so the final thing is that if it is a safety critical task, then all of those metrics, all of those measures, all those targets, they go up to 100%. And you'll see what that's like in an example shortly. And then the style guide. So this kind of evolves during design and development. It's not something they start out with right away. They don't say, oh, here's my style guide, right? A lot of it has to do with what operating system you're on. But really what it lays out, how all your user interface and your GUI elements are going to work. What are your buttons? What's your color scheme? How do all those work? Navigation. It can be code snippets. It could be sample layouts or pattern libraries. But what's important about it is, and for Agile, every little team is off working their own piece of functionality. And when you bring it all together, you may end up with a very inconsistent design. So if you do have this style guide, you can make sure everybody's using, designing the GUI the same way. And so that's why that's important. And another reason is because when you get down to test and evaluation, you can hold the vendor to their own style guide. They must be compliant with it. So when you find deficiencies or outages, you can say you need to fix this at no cost to the Army, right? So because you don't align with your own style guide. So we already talked about user-centered design and that it's a framework of processes, right? It's a philosophy. The user's at the center, and it's refined by user feedback through an iterative process. It's documented in the HSI plan, and it really addresses the entire user experience. And I've already talked about the HRL standard provides a really nice, well-structured framework for doing UCD. User-centered design activities. So this is kind of my take on user-centered design activities. I know it looks like a waterfall, but it is not a waterfall. And if anybody knows a better way for me to picture this so it doesn't look like a waterfall, I am happy to hear it. So really, I see it as kind of 3 phases, rough phases, where we understand, we visualize, and we evaluate. And you can see there's iteration everywhere throughout there. So I'm getting my thoughts in my head. We want to understand there's a lot of things we can do at this phase. And I also want to say that, some of these things, just because I say they're in the understand phase, we may also cross over into the visualization phase. And you'll see some of that in the examples later on. Okay. So, you can do interviews, card sorting, focus groups, modeling and simulations, questionnaires, surveys, look at previous assessments, do some reverse engineering. Look at acquisition documentation, do lit reviews, look at the Center for Army Lessons Learned. That's always a good source. Product reviews, comparative analysis, conduct observational studies, and task analysis. So visualize, you may want to create personas that are stereotypical characterization of your users. Use cases, user stories, wireframing, concept design drawings. You can do participatory design, do human figure modeling. Some people are familiar with Jack. Wireframing, prototyping, do process and workflow mapping, scripted scenarios, storyboards, affinity diagrams. And then for evaluate, again, interviews, observation, benchmarking, expert reviews, questionnaires, HSI assessments, heuristic evaluation. You can collect data during after-action reviews. You could do user acceptance testing, large-scale evaluation and training events, usability testing, log demos, validation verification events. A lot of things you can do, and there's more. But this is just a sampling of them. And what I do is I take that UCD activity toolkit I have, and I pull from it and I say, to develop my tailored soldier-centered design process, this is what I'm going to document in my HSI plan, right? So these are the things that I really typically do. I have my usability metrics already. I have a DID for the style guide, a CDRL for that. I'm always going to conduct a lit review, see what's been done before, conduct user juries or focus groups, online surveys, observational studies, and design focused task analysis. And I'll talk about what that is. It's a particular type of task analysis I like to do. And then when you get to visualize, then you're looking at workflow maps, affinity diagrams, you're looking at use cases, wireframes, paper prototyping, participatory design, and of course the style guide is a visualization of what the GUI will look like. And then evaluate, you can do heuristic evaluations, usability testing, and again, log demos, DevOps, customer tests, and comparative analytics. And then you go to fielding, and then you go to planning. And this doesn't really ever end, right? Because software is never over, we are told. I select these activities based on what is the design data that I need, what are the resources available to perform these UCD activities, where are we in the design process? Are we very early on and so we only have wireframes available? Or are we later where we have engineering releases of the software? What is the acquisition strategy? What is the stage of product development? And where are we in the integrated master schedule? And in fact, the integrated master schedule is important for me because I do not include the schedule of events in my HSI plan because I never know that far out what we're going to be doing and where we're going to be. So I don't put it in there. I just put roughly we conduct one soldier STP every quarter. That's what we try to do for every program. If it's more, that's great, but that's what we shoot for. And I usually know maybe a month out, maybe 2 if I'm lucky, what we're going to be doing. It's a process. Sometimes it takes me a while to find the units who will volunteer to participate. I do all that on my own. But right now, Colonel Inglis, who's the Army Capability Manager, Fire Cells and Targeting, is actually helping me get soldiers. And it's really made my life so much easier for 2 of the programs, 2 of our new starts. But for precision fires, dismounted and mounted, I'm still on my own finding units. Okay. Here we go. With my first acquisition experience, that was over 20 years ago, that influenced my approach to HSI in the Army. All right. Right before Milestone C, here I am, brand new. Oh, it's Milestone C. We need an HSI assessment for this new military GPS that's replacing the plugger. What am I going to do, right? So I need to find out what's working. I need data. I can't just write an assessment without data, right? Because that's all I do is report data. So I have to know what's working well, what isn't, what are the issues, what are their severity, what are the root causes, and how can we potentially mitigate them. Like I said earlier, the first thing I always do is a literature review, right? So I did a lit search, and I found that there was a fratricide issue with the predecessor system, the plugger. So then I wondered, I wonder if that issue is still present in this new system called the Dagger. All right. Here's the issue. It was described in the Washington Post. By the simple act of a U.S. Special Forces air controller changing the battery on a GPS system he was using to target a Taliban outpost north of Kandahar, without realizing the machine was programmed to come back on showing the coordinates of his own location, the controller mistakenly called in the American position to a B-52. According to an official, it's an understandable mistake under the stress of operations, going back to your operational overload, task overload. It's not a flagrant error. It's not a violation of a procedure. Stuff like that, truth be known, happens to all of us every day. It's just that the stakes in battle are so high. We need to know how our equipment works. When the battery is changed, it defaults to its own location, and we've got to make sure our people understand this. Okay. So, I decided to go out. I had actually gone out to an operational test event but was told to leave because my mere presence would bias data collection. And I was just like, whoa, civilians are that powerful in the Army? Okay. So I left. And so I thought, well, I need data. I need data for my assessment. What am I going to do? So I knew a soldier and I talked to him, and he was an instructor out at Fort Eisenhower, then called Fort Gordon. And he said, well, how about you come out and you do, I told him I want to do a usability test. And he said, well, why don't you do it with some of our soldiers in AIT? Okay, so I did that. I went out there and I did that for a week. And then we had a field element out at Fort Leonard Wood. And there were MPs out and doing their advanced leaders course. And it was their last week and they were in bivouac out on the ranges. So I spent a week with them out on the ranges and did my usability tests out there. So the procedure works like this, the consent form, demographic questionnaire, an overview, and then I would do task-specific training. Then they would perform the 4 main tasks while I recorded their requests for assistance and any problems they encountered. And after each task, they completed a post-task questionnaire. And then the wrap-up was a post-test questionnaire, an interview, and a brief. So the important thing about this training is that I really trained them. I described it to them. I showed them how it worked. And then they performed the task until they did it accurately 2 times in a row. I wanted to make sure they really knew how to perform these 4 tasks, right? So that nobody would tell me that it was because, a training issue. I want to show it's a user interface issue, right? If there are any issues. These are the 4 tasks. They had to initialize the dagger, which means they power it up. They wait for it to get a fix. They check the battery status. This is all just looking at the screen, right? Same thing. They run a self-test, and then they calibrate the compass, which means they spin it around. Then they entered and edit data. They marked their present position and they labeled it. This is me. They created a new waypoint and a hazard alert. They edited some waypoint labels and coordinates. Then they interacted with the presented information. So they did navigation. They observed hazard alerts. They avoided these imitation landmines I had made up and asked them to identify their present position. I was just wondering, what would happen when they're focusing on this GPS, or how are they going to use it? Are they going to miss the fact that there's this imitation landmine there? What's their situational awareness like, right? So when I plotted the course that we would most likely travel for land nav, I just laid these things out so they were there, visible, and saw whether or not they found them. And then manipulate data. So they reenacted that call for fire scenario, which meant, oh, look, soldier, there's the enemy right there. They would go to their fire support page. They would visually estimate the distance to the target. They would enter the azimuth and range to the target. And then they would convert the coordinates from MGRS to lat long. And then I tell them, bad news, I'm sorry, but your batteries just ran out. Go ahead, power down, replace your batteries, and power up. And when you're ready, report the target's coordinates for an airstrike. So what did we find? Oh, these are all the same metrics, basically, that I always use, right? So I even used them over 20 years ago. Same thing, except that for now, it's 100%, right? Because I don't want them to call for fire. That's a safety critical task, not to call for fire on yourself. All right, so what was working well? Putting the system in continuous mode, and there you see the steps. It was easy to turn it on and off, remove, replace batteries, get a fix, identify your present position, everything you can see there for ease of use, the cognitive workload, and the success rate. Everything exceeded the targets, right? It was easy to navigate, calibrate the compass, create and edit waypoints, put it into continuous mode, and set up a hazard alert and check battery life. And here you can see the soldier, this MP, he is actually calibrating. He was calibrating the compass, but he didn't trust that it was really accurate. So he took out his lensatic compass and he was comparing them to make sure they were the same, trying to develop that trust in digital equipment. What was not working well? Requesting a call for fire. So here you see the usability gap. 40% of the soldiers called for fire on their present position. So I was very concerned. What did they tell me? It didn't go back to where I was. I didn't notice it. These are people who called for fire on their present location. Make sure when it comes back on that there is a very obvious thing saying, hey, you are on the current location, not what you were looking at before. The exercise that you gave me out there was good because I might be thrown in some kind of situation, like while I'm over in Iraq, where my batteries are dead and I've got to put them back in, and then, oh my goodness, latitude and longitude. I can't find it now. I'm rushing. I see the enemy. And I would have killed myself because it would have been my own present location. It's very interesting when I present this scenario to soldiers at different courses that they're attending, and to see whether they think it's a training issue or a user interface issue, right? A command issue. Root causes of the issue. Okay, here we see the two screens side by side. One is the present position and one is the fire support. This is something no soldiers are ever going to see, the two screens side by side, right? And you can see they look kind of similar. So there's that. And then soldiers are unfamiliar using latitude and longitude. Maybe if those grids had been in MGRS, they would have realized it was their position, but now they're in latitude and longitude, something they're not that familiar using. They had an inaccurate mental model, right? The device always returns to the present position page. It does not go back to the page you were just on, which was their false belief. And it wasn't obvious that they weren't where they expected to be. And lo and behold, it's our own perceptual system's weakness for detecting unexpected visual changes called change blindness. You're not going to see it when you don't expect to see it. It's just the way we're wired. Mitigation. Okay, so the developer added a warning pop-up screen. And I obtained the updated software and I retested it with 12 soldiers, CAF scouts, and all successfully completed the call for fire scenario. But my concern is that there's over 100 of these pop-ups. And when you first turn on the system, you just dismiss them all saying, enter, 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 enter. The odds are they ever going to really read that in a real use case scenario? I don't think so. So you'll get that habituation, right, issue. And so the recommendation was really, here's what you need to do. You need to, rather than hit the enter for this one, you should hit the present position button, because that's just reinforcing that you just hit your present position and that's where you are now. But they would not change it. And then long-term recommendation was to just really make those two screens look completely different. So you know, just by looking at the screen where you are. So, you know, I kept tabs on this issue to see if it would occur again. And as far as I know, it's not occurred on the battlefield, but it has occurred more than a few times in training. And actually, that was one of my recommendations in my HSI assessment, was that, you know, soldiers really had to go through this scenario in new equipment training. They had to see and live it to see what really happens when they're using the device. So this is what happens when you get involved at milestone C. You have to write an assessment. You make it red, which is not a color anybody likes, apparently. And that means stop, do not go until you make the mitigation. So that's why they made that one mitigation and had me retest it. It tested okay for the short term, but I don't think it was a good long-term solution. So fast forward to now, right? I learned my lesson. I do not want to get involved at milestone C. I don't even really want to get involved at milestone B. I want to get involved even earlier. So that's what I looked for when I wanted to support programs. I didn't want to be 10% on this one, 25% on that one. I really wanted to be 100% to a PM shop so I can do that full before milestone A all the way throughout. So for about 6 years, I worked in tactical radios 100%, and then had other jobs along the way. So we'll just move on to the next slide. All right. So for soldier centricity, the most important thing, right? And you always hear this for human factors, know your users. And that is very important. So here I'm just going to describe an overly simplified concept of operation. And this is for dynamic targeting, not deliberate dynamic. So here you're going to see some of my users and some of the programs I support. So here's my forward observer using a precision fires dismounted system out in the battlefield. And he will see the enemy, he will sight the enemy, and he will request a call for fire. It will get sent to the fire support officer, who will be using our precision fires mounted system in a BFIST or Striker FSV. Then from there, he will send it to the fire direction officer, and on the FATADS box, or the Advanced Field Artillery Tactical Data System box, will be an MOS 13 Juliet, and he will be operating the box and taking direction from the fire direction officer. He will be responsible for clearing air and ground. And then when that's done, he will send the mission to the gun line. And then after the gun shoots it, then fire mission processing messages, status messages are sent all the way back up the line. So they'll get shot, splash, rounds complete. When the forward observer gets that, then he knows that he can send a battle damage assessment report or another mission if desired effects weren't achieved. So that's really like a really simplistic version of what my users do for dynamic targeting. Know my users. Who are they? Well, here you see I work with predominantly MOS 13X and their counterparts in the Marine Corps for the FATADS system and JDOCs and JTICs. Those systems are up at higher echelons. So here you can see the most important, you can see their ASVAB field artillery scores, their length of time in training and what their skills are. So for my 13 Foxes, their physical heavy strength, they have to encode and decode messages and weapons operations. Those are important skill sets for them. For the 13 Juliets on the FATADS and other systems too, you can see their FA score is a 93 on the ASVAB, and time in training. It's important for them to know information processing, calculating and recording data, and weapons operations. For my MOS 131A, my warrant officer, he's a field artillery targeting technician. Here, his skills, they're very highly experienced, seasoned people by the time they become a warrant officer, right? And for their GT scores, it's a combination of arithmetic, reasoning, word knowledge, and paragraph comprehension. And for skilled tech, it's a combination of word knowledge, paragraph comprehension, general science, mechanical comprehension, and mathematics knowledge. So they're highly skilled. And for the 13 Alpha, they're the field artillery officers. Here they have 4-year degrees, or they are in a degree program. They have to have a secret security clearance. In fact, most of these soldiers have to have a secret security clearance. And then their skills are tactical operations, defense strategy, and again, weapons operations. So that's who my users are. So knowing my user not only involves understanding them, but also their work. How do they do what they do? Why do they do it that way? What tasks are most critical? What do they do most frequently? What's working well? What isn't? And how can we just make this system better for them? Especially since we're investing all this money and effort into building a new system. All right. Knowing them will help us build a solid design foundation, and it'll help us know where we need to place test emphasis and design emphasis throughout the design and development process. Okay, I don't do anything alone. These are all the people I work with. So it is really a multi-organization and disciplinary collaboration for everything I do. You can see here who I work with: program management, product development, requirements and doctrine. So I work, for me, that would be the Army Capability Manager, Fire Cells Targeting. I also work with the TRADOC Multi-Domain Targeting Center for my higher echelon systems, and test and evaluation, and then my HSI counterparts in those 5 domains, and then the final domains down at the bottom with safety and occupational health. Now, for those domain assessments I talked earlier, I do manpower, personnel training, human factors, and habitability. I do some of force protection and survivability, but we also have a DevCom AC group that does survivability for us. And for safety and occupational health, I work with the CCOM Safety Center and the Defense Centers for Public Health in Aberdeen. So nice thing in the Army, we don't have to, we have some specialization that we can go to help us with these other domains. So it's really important to involve the team to build a shared understanding of our users and their work. Since we're all involved, it makes vetting, user feedback, and coming to consensus and agreement on design issues and how to handle them a lot less work. For example, 1 week ago for Precision Fires Mounted, we just vetted 34 user recommendations for design, changes, and enhancements, and we did that in 45 minutes, which is pretty amazing, really, to talk through all those issues and how to move forward on them or not to, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later on. So really, it's good to involve the team, and here you can see designers out with us getting feedback on wireframes. The ACM FCT actually collected data with me, so the important thing is for me not only to bring them along, but for them to interact with the soldiers and collect data during the soldier touch points. So I mentor them and I train them on how to do this, and I try to standardize all the methods that I use and template them so it's easier for us all to be collecting data on the same page in the same way, so I don't have to worry about inconsistencies. The former ACM, actually, Fire Cells and Targeting, actually came with us on a TDY and documented workflows. Of course, we were in Japan, so maybe that's why, I don't know. But he actually documented workflows. So, and our chief system engineer collected data during usability testing. So it's the other thing it does is everybody understands a little bit better what I do, because nobody knows what human factors people and human system integration people do. Like, people say to me, they didn't tell me, I went to the meeting with the program manager and he didn't tell me what I should be doing. Like, he doesn't know your job. You have to tell him what you need to do in order to support him the best way you can. So this is all just makes it a little easier to get to that place. Okay, life cycle totality. Yes.
Sorry, another question. On the Army aviation programs that I've supported, they'll have a dedicated sub-IPT for human system integration, which and you showed all the folks that you work with. And I think that works great because I think the work you do is critical as we move forward and to think about what to do for OT. For the programs in your portfolio, are they structured that way? In other words, like I support DOT&E, so I'm able to, say, participate as part of that HSI group all along in development. Sometimes in aviation, we call them crew station working groups, but it's critical for aviation so that I think we get that added emphasis on it. I didn't know if you also do it that way.
Yes.
For the programs you support.
Yes, thank you. Yes, all of the test and evaluation folks are invited to all our IPT meetings. It's everybody who touches the program now or later. Everybody's involved. ATEC and DOT&E are invited to all my soldier touch points. I share the plans with them, and I share the results. The PM believes, and it's nice to work for a PM who believes this, he believes in open kimono. That's how he says it. So, so I can just, I just check with him and then I can share anything. So it's very nice that way. So since 2015, I have been 100%ed by this PM shop to do field artillery command and control systems. So I can be involved before we even become a program of record. I've been involved before we even contracted with a vendor, collecting data already, that early data. I would prefer to bring the vendors with us, but sometimes it's good just to have that base knowledge just to go forward and then bring them along a little later on to events. Here you just see pictured some of the things that we do early that I wouldn't have been able to do more than half of this if I'd gotten involved just at Milestone B, where there's somebody to pay for the program for an HSI person. So much better, I can do a lot more. So UCD really is an enabler. It will help you get a deeper holistic understanding of complex data and interactions. You can identify unanticipated needs, and it really increase your confidence in findings by using mixed methods, multiple mixed methods, right? Collecting qualitative and quantitative data. A lot of my work is qualitative, not so much quantitative. So it's just the way it is. I have to make visible what's invisible, what's going on in people's heads. I have to find that out. And the only way to do that is to talk to them. All right, now we're going to get into some of the actual UCD activities that we typically perform. So for in the understand phase, we conduct design-focused task analysis, and the whole purpose of this is to find out what's working well and what is not, and where to place design and test and test emphasis, especially during usability testing for me. So what we did is we went out to units. We went out to 3 Army units and went out to all the Marine Corps MEFs, and we asked them to bring their FATADS box. That's what they call it, a FATADS box, and to show us exactly how they perform, how they use the box, the software, to perform all their mission tasks. And as they did that, we documented them in workflows in PowerPoint. And we did it took 3 days per unit for 4 of us. And we ended up with a lot of data. We also captured data which is role specific. So what echelon do you work at, and what is your position? Because we have 13 Foxes and 13 Juliets who use this system. So we were trying to get at a lot of that data, and it was important for us because the software is going to be role duty based at this time. And since then, you'll find out later on, we had to stop work, and now we're with new government software developer groups that are designing this MVP for us. And now the decision was made to actually create 3 separate apps, which is quite different than where we were back here, where we were just going to say, pick your role duty, and then we'll show you functions that you have access to. And you could always pick other things, if you felt you had a need for them for some reason, like you were jumping talk or something like that. But this is the way we're going now. So we sat there with them, we flow charted it, and then the next we'd go back to our hotels at night and we'd finish them up and look them over, make them look good. And the next day when we'd go back, the first thing we did was review them with the soldier and have him go over everything again, because we always found changes. They missed something. Oh, they thought about it overnight and they think they also need this, or this is not any good and we need to change it. So that was good that we did it that way. So we felt more confident with what we had. And here you see a little snapshot of what annotated workflows look like. And they actually have, They identify on them what's critical, what's irrelevant, what's missing, where are the capability gaps. And here you see a photo. So when we were with the Marines, they wanted a special ConOps that they do in free text messaging. They would like it to be built as a form into the system. So we took pictures of what all that looked like and put that into the annotated workflows. Other things that came out of this were patterns of use and disuse. So for this soldier in this role, at this echelon, you can see everything is red is what he does not use. We went through every single menu, every single item, every workspace, and we got these patterns that emerged. We also collected what's good, the goodness, the things they want to sustain. There are some things the system does really well, even though it's over 30 years old. It's antiquated, but there's some goodness in it, and they want to see that continue. And then we captured a usability baseline. And this baseline that you see here, none of this is actual data really, but it gives you an idea that most of our tasks did not meet, the current tasks in the legacy system did not meet our usability criteria in the minds of the soldiers that we spoke to. Another thing that we typically do is conduct contextual inquiries, which are observational studies. Contextual inquiry is just an ethnographic technique that involves watching and listening to users in their natural environment. So here we are out at NTC in the top, looking at how FHS operators work. What screens do they have up? What are they doing based on their role, duty? All that information we capture. Oh, and we have it in reports. So, no, it's okay. I can yell.
Oh, they won't hear you online.
Oh.
That's
But this won't apply to them. But in the room, I have a bunch of, I just grabbed a few of my deliverables. So if you want to look at them during a break or lunch or anything like that, or afterwards, I have some deliverables here. And I actually have the NTC report here as well. And then down on the bottom of the right there, you see my system engineer for PFDM, Precision Fires Dismounted and Mounted. He's with me we went to units at BFIS and the Stryker FSV. So we try to go to all of our users for each piece of equipment because we don't want to leave anyone out. The one challenge I have right now is that I'm trying to find users that would use our Precision Fires Mounted system in a Humvee. And it's really hard to find them, especially now with the way the Army is changing. So I'm keeping my hunt. Thought I had one group, but they're not going to be using Precision Fire Mounted. They're going to dismount it for everything. So focus groups, online surveys, always popular to use. So our main goal here was to find out, you can see in the blue box, what's critical, frequent, and problematic, so we know where to place design emphasis, as well as where to really place our emphasis when we do usability testing. Here you can see, again, the usability baseline, the patterns of use and disuse. Even in the focus groups, we spent a lot of time getting into the weeds to get some of this information. Used a fishbone diagram to show some of the usability issues. Also created affinity diagrams that I call fillets, because we found out that these fishbone diagrams didn't contain enough of the information about the issue, because you shorten them down to just a phrase, and it really wasn't enough of the meat. So my husband told me to call them fillets. So they're, again, they're just another type of affinity diagram where we've categorized all the problems by the functionality that's in the system. So mainly what we did is we went out to units. We saw about 50 soldiers at a time. We did not conduct focus groups with the 50 soldiers, but we had them fill out our questionnaires, and then we scheduled them to come back throughout the day into smaller groups of 10. Other focus groups, we just were with different units. Different units wanted to handle it differently, and we were fine with that. We actually spent 3 hours with them, and they would actually bring their FATAD system and work through it and show us where the issues were in a focus group setting. Understand online surveys. So we do quite a bit with online surveys, trying really short surveys, pointed design questions. So here's an example. You see the layout on the top of the screen there where it says mission list. That was one way to format this data. There was a second way to format it. And we had that in the survey. And then we asked them questions to try to get performance data. You know, we asked them to use the data in the spreadsheet so we could get some performance data, some accuracy data from them. And then we also had them rate ease of use and what they preferred to get their preference data. And in the end, you know, it determined which one of the two design alternatives would get implemented. It's just one example. Focus groups, another thing we do with focus groups is have them give us feedback on wireframes and design concepts. Find out, you know, what desired functionality and what their implementation preferences are and what new design ideas they have. We can picture different items and ask them, you know, which they prefer, and actually get design direction this way as well. So during the focus group pictured here, this was just a few weeks ago with the 101st Airborne Division. We collected user needs and their reactions toward design concepts and wireframes for that FATADS replacement system. It's called AXE. It's the Artillery Execution Suite, and it's a modernization effort to actually replace FATADS. So we've already had 2 SCPs for that, and we're having our third one in June-July timeframe. Participatory design. So this is back on a FATAD 7.0. We had done usability testing, and we had them do some fire mission processing, and soldiers told us it would not meet their time standards, the current design. There was too much scrolling left and right, scrolling up and down, jumping around. No, it's just not going to work. So we decided the next time we went out to do usability testing, we would do paper prototyping. So we asked the vendor to print out really large screens, you know, printouts of the current screens. And here you see pictured Scott Sines with the beard. He was our training lead back then. And he was actually a former operator. So he's a subject matter expert on the system. And I trained him how to conduct the sessions, and he conducted 8 sessions where they went through how to process the fire mission. They mocked everything up, you know, taking these screenshots, crossing out what they don't want, putting things below the fold, above the fold by folding, by really folding the paper, and mock them all up. And after the 8 sessions, he had all these, examples. He consolidated it and actually prepared the wireframes that we handed off to the vendor that would hopefully achieve fire mission processing. Now, we don't know if they ever did because there was a stop work order. But we can mock it up, and we could always do some rapid prototyping and find out. But I don't even know how the new system is going to be so different. It's going to be on TAC, the Tactical Assault Kit. So the user interface is going to be totally different. Participatory design. Another thing you can do is card sorting. So basically, you just, here we were looking at the Precision Fires Dismounted has about 47 messages, anything from call for fire, battle damage assessment, free text, 47 of them. And the developer organized them into 3 different tabs to what he thought would be best. And he wondered, does this make sense to a soldier? So I said, well, why don't we just do card sorting? We'll have them sort out the cards and put them in the way they would organize these messages, you know, in the order, and lay them out that way. And the Army Capability Manager, you know, he's with us. He comes to our soldier touch points. And he was really fascinated by the process and how different people organize them differently. And then in the end, he said, I don't like it. I don't, you know, what people said was there was no consensus. And people said, really what I want to be able to order it the way I want it to be ordered. And he said, no, that's a no-go. He wants everything to be standard. So if something happens that somebody else picks up a device, it's standard. He doesn't have to go searching for where things are. So I said, well, how about we just come up with a favorites tab? And then that way, because we found out soldiers only use about a half a dozen of these frequently. So they can just take those half a dozen, put them in their favorites tab, and then we have some customization that way. So that's what we ended up doing for that. What we just did recently was the Army Capability Manager wanted to know if we had our requirements, binning, and prioritization in good alignment with what soldiers would expect. So we did another card sorting there. So I put all the requirements on cards, binned on cards, and then the soldiers just laid them out in priority, what they thought was priority order. So we had soldiers do that, and we had DIVARTY commanders do that. And so he had his answer on that one, on how well we aligned with it. And there, too, it's interesting to see people coming from different perspectives, the differences in the data we collected. And evaluate. Usability testing, I'm going to go into in depth in the next section, so I'm not really going to cover it here. I've talked already, I touched on the DevOps exercises where we went out into the field. We did interoperability assessments. So this was one of the most realistic, operationally valid in the field usability tests I've ever done. We're usually part test testing. And then when I finally get to see the equipment interconnected with the systems it's going to typically operate with, it's usually at an operational test. It'd be nice if we could do it. Sometimes in the labs, they'll do it a little earlier, but still we're not collecting soldier feedback then. So something absolutely that we have to work on, right? Area of improvement. And if we follow the HRLs, that will come. So I would have to say my lessons learned are it requires doing what I do requires constant education of the stakeholders, because not everybody knows what human factors is, what HSI is, and that we can get soldier touch points, methodology structured, and get good results that you can have confidence in. I would say you have to embed and immerse yourself in the organization. At one point, Colonel Crosby, who was the PM Mission Command, asked me, would I just do fires 90% and then do CPI, another program with a lot of vehicles, 10%. And that's when I found out, I didn't want to work that way in the first place, right? And I ended up working like 150% or more that year, because there's just no way you can provide 10% support to a program. So I would say if you ever are working with HSI, minimum 25, but I would really try to get 50%, because there's so much more they can do that they may not be doing at those lower funding levels. I said get involved as early as possible and really be ready to explain what you can do before there's even a system. Because a lot of people say to me, oh, we don't have a system yet, Dr. Pam, so yeah, you don't need to be at this meeting. I said, yes, I do. Because decisions you're making now about system architecture are going to affect the user interface down the road, and I need to understand what that is so I can be prepared for it. When using mock-ups and wireframes, make sure they're concrete and grounded in realism. It's an experience just had a couple months ago. I had used Command Post Computing Environment, CPCE, screens from their alerts framework. And I said, just imagine it. We were rushing to get everything done at the last minute. And I said, just imagine it instead with a FATADS alerts there. They could not do that. They just kept going to CPC. So then what I did was I went home, and right before I went out again, I actually mocked them up to show the FATADS messaging in that CPCE framework. And then it tested much better during the next round of testing with users. So really have to be really concrete and realistic as much as possible. Include the full range of user expertise from novice to expert as appropriate. So early on in a lot of our STPs, we're really talking to subject matter experts. Once we get to usability testing, then we're opening up to the full range from novice experience to expert because we want that full range in usability. The activities and process must be experienced for the value to be understood. I can stand up here and I can talk to you about all these things we did and how great they were and the data we got and how we influenced design and really made the system better and intuitive. But it's nothing like going and seeing for yourself. My one Colonel Anderson, he was talking to the ACM, and the ACM asked me, we were in a meeting, and he said, so how is it that you get to do all this? How did you convince Colonel Anderson? And I thought it was a briefing I gave him. He said, no, it's not that at all. He said it was actually going out and watching you work with soldiers and all the data that you were able to collect. And he said, I was just blown away by it. So great to have champions like that on your side. So I would just say, try to get people to come out with you because really seeing it, you really understand the value. And not only can you apply UCD to system design, you can also apply it to the documentation, the training, and quick reference guides and any other product support apps or job aids that you're developing. I've done usability testing on our computer-based training, on our quick reference guide, and always find improvements based on the soldiers' feedback. And then, of course, track usability metrics to assess and manage the ability to meet users' needs. So is it useful? Is it usable? And how can we make it better? Even identifying future requirements. We just did that in a recent usability test for Precision Fires Mounted, where you'll see later on some one-offs were determined to be great to implement now, and other ones were, hey, those are amazing future requirements as we want to beef up our capability to provide more support to our fire supporters. So that is, I think, no, maybe that's it. So really, for us to have an impact, we have to go back to focus on the users, our soldiers, involve everyone, and try to be involved throughout the whole life cycle. So that's the recommendations I give to my HSI counterparts. That is it. So our main objective here is to understand the relationship between usability testing and the HRL scale. And beginning with HRL 4 and continuing through 5, we conduct part task testing and we update usage scenarios with what we learn. We update preliminary human-machine functional allocations. We develop strategies to minimize risk for all the HSI domains. We determine the extent to which human performance requirements and metrics have been met. We assess design concepts to identify the most viable candidates that we should pursue. And we're always working on optimizing task and workflows. So, and then at HRL 6, you have that system that's designed, that's fully matured, and evaluation activities can increase in fidelity, and you could look at the full range of usage scenarios, including emergency and normal events. So some of these I try to include anyway in my part task testing. So for example, where I talked about the lesson learned very early on was what happens when you turn off power on a GPS, right? How are they going to know how to go back and start working after that? A lot of times I include, almost always now, that power off. I just shut the system down and see what happens. Okay, continue your task. So we can do that even in usability. So for usability, we're going to talk about a couple of definitions, a little bit on historical background, why usability, a little just touch on user-centered design framework, how it fits in. I'll talk about usability measurement. We already talked about that. So some things will go a little faster for this one. And how we plan, execute, report, and track progress. And then I'll summarize it. So here are pictured usability tests at a variety of Army locations. Most of this recent usability testing was for precision fires mounted because we're further along in that development for that program. Down here, it's the lower left is usability tested for the Mounted Mission Command System, which is the JBC Joint Battle Command Platform replacement. So we're modernizing a lot of our command and control systems right now. So depending on where we are in the process, we're doing a lot of usability testing. Okay, so here's a few different definitions of usability. One is the ISO definition, the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, and satisfaction in a specific context. There's a lot of specificity in this one. Mary Carol Day from the AT&T Technical Journal, usability refers to how easily the functions of a product or service are learned and used by actual users. And then one by Steve Krug, Don't Make Me Think, really just means making sure something works well, that a person with average ability and experience can use the thing. Well, for us, we know our people aren't average, but we still have to get them to be able to use our complicated systems. User experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interactions with the company, its services, its products. It could be our technical documentation, training. If we have a help desk or a call center, we have one of those. How well are we doing there as well? It's the whole user experience. If your user experience is a positive one, it'll have the attributes shown in this graphic. It'll be usable, useful, desirable, valuable, accessible, credible, trustworthy, findable. Information will be findable. So, you're generally going to have a positive experience if all those things are positive. We've already talked about user-centered design quite a bit, so I'm going to skip over this one. And I'm going to go right to usability, a little bit on its history. So in the 70s, there was no scientific basis for understanding usability. There were no general theories, no standard methods or techniques. In the 80s, there was a greater variety among PC users, and the rapid learning and self-study became critical. The development cycles started becoming compressed. There were small and distributed software development teams, and prototyping was being used to drive system development. Then in the 90s, scenario-based usability engineering emerged, with usability targets applied throughout the development cycle. And then use cases for object-oriented development were also being used. And then we skip to the present day, and usability is becoming more commonplace in industry, but it's slowly making its way into military system design. So some of the positives of usability testing are you can get early user buy-in, you can uncover problems, you can discover opportunities, capability gaps, you can limit surprises at test and evaluation at operational test. It's less expensive to correct usability issues early. And if you're doing agile development, it's just part of the process, so you should be doing it. Now, according to cons in the literature, target users are a must. Well, yeah, target users are a must. I'm only going to my target users. There's going to be no validity to my results, right? It's labor intensive to run. We have not found that at all. Yeah, you need a week of prep, then you run it, and then you have your results. It may take a week to get your results out, but that's not labor intensive in my mind. Results are arguable. I don't think our results are arguable. We use a method. We identify issues according to our usability metrics. They're stringent metrics because we're going to get what we get, whether or not we have high usability metrics or low usability metrics. And I want to get the best we can get for the money we're paying. So I want high metrics. And is it expensive? No. And in fact, I'm sorry those in virtually can't see this, but what I'm doing is I'm just going to pass around a couple of books, one book actually, a couple copies of Designing Soldier Systems. And in here I have chapter 13 is my chapter where I talk about evaluation, usability and evaluation. And I also in my chapter talk about myths and I debunk those myths. Most of these things in red. So I actually have how much it costs to conduct the usability study back when that chapter was written. Why or why not? You know, why? Well, I say, why not? I mean, poor design costs time and money, right? And as we saw with our GPS case, it can cost lives as well. I like Claire Marie Carrot's target here, 95% success rate for users within 3 minutes of initial use of app. I can't even imagine that. I have to tell you, after all the thousands of people I've run through usability tests, I can't imagine meeting this target. I guess it could be met if something's very simple, but most of our systems are just not that simple. I mean, the 85% is amazing to me that we can meet that, and then we don't put a time limit unless that task actually has a time limit in standards. Like you must process a mission once it hits your box in 5 minutes, for example. That's probably not the real, I can't talk about the real time limits, but I'll just say 5 minutes, and can they do it? And then it matters, right? And then at the University of Copenhagen, they just, they said, you know, 20% of our time is wasted on computer problems. Why? Because people aren't involved enough when systems are developed. So our goal here is to involve those systems, you know, involve our users in system development. And it's kind of what we found in doing all this usability testing. At the end of the session, we asked soldiers, you know, what did they like the most about the system? And we use an exhaustive technique for that. So we keep asking them until they have nothing more to say. And then we do the same thing with what did you dislike about the system? And then we ask them, you know, what advice do you have for the developers, the program office? And they always say, you need to do more of this. You need to do more of this. It's going to help the system. So when it gets out to the field, we'll be able to use it. So yes, they would agree with this statement. We've already talked about our objectives and our measurement. These are exactly the same usability targets that I discussed earlier. So I'll just skip over that. And I'll talk more about the modified Cooper-Harper cognitive workload rating scale. Okay, so designed for use in the cockpits during World War II. And what I've done is I've taken it and I've actually simplified the questions in the flow chart. So here I have one example. The first question, you start where it says down here, start here. And the original text for this step was, even though errors may be large or frequent, can instructed tasks be accomplished most of the time? So simplified it to, were you able to complete the task? Yes or no? So we've tried to just simplify these words. We explained to soldiers how to use this tool before we start the usability test. And I tell them first or second time, it's going to seem like a lot, but you know, once they get on a roll, they have no problem filling this out. And after a while, they're barely looking at it. And then maybe if they come across a usability issue and they really want to give it one of these higher 4 through 10 ratings, then they will look back at this. Otherwise, they get used to using it. And they use it a lot because we ask them to rate the ease of use and cognitive workload for each step in a task, because we want to find out where specifically the problem is. Not that there was just a problem logging in. Where is that problem? What's the root cause and how can we fix it? So I like this decision tree a lot because it enables participants to make judgments based on the cognitive workload as it relates to the design and what design changes are needed in order to make cognitive workload acceptable. All right, we collect usability during usability tests, which I'll be talking about, but we collect usability data no matter what we're doing, really. Every opportunity we can, we collect it, whether we're doing contextual inquiries, paper prototyping, card sorting, making down select decisions. So there you see, pictured my daughter. She does HSI for Intel Systems. She's in the building next to me in Aberdeen Proving Ground. And so there she is actually running usability tests for competing vendors in order to make a down select decision. Wireframes, tech manual verifications, tech manual and training support package validation and verification, logistics demos, another great place to collect some usability feedback. And during new equipment training, just sitting, observing, looking where the problems are, what are they having trouble understanding. I have another metric, right? After the metric was, after new equipment training, 90% of the users are going to be able to complete the task on the first attempt, right? So after new equipment training, and they've been trained for the day, at the end of the day, I asked them. So one thing I want to just mention, doing these kind of wireframe evaluations where people actually don't have hands-on or using demos to collect feedback, static presentations, you have to be careful when you're doing that, and it's really important that afterwards you follow it up with a usability test. Why do I say that? Well, back in 1998, when I was doing some forward-looking research on multimedia messaging, when I worked at Bell Labs, I had conducted focus groups with this messaging app, and I had wireframes, right? And we had asked them what did they think about having media indicators on the message so they knew whether it was a text, a video, or a voice message. And everybody in that focus group, the data said, no, we just want to see an envelope. And why? What was the rationale for that? Because we're going to have to open all our messages anyway. Okay, so went ahead and created a rapid prototype. So I had a Pascal course in college, and I can build rapid prototypes using SuperCard on the Mac. So I did that. I mocked it up on SuperCard, and I had them use it to go perform usability testing, right? And what did I find? One of the first comments was, I need to see whether it's text or voice or a video. It matters to me. I might, look at one now and another one later, or maybe never, but it matters. They needed to know that. So interesting, right? So it's very similar to now, this is exactly how systems work now, right? From the icons what those messages or files or folders have in them, right? By the visual indicator of, yeah, this is text, this is PowerPoint, this is Excel. You know that. It's not just a file, blank vanilla file. So interesting. It's just one example. I have more. All right. For my users, another critical consideration in usability testing is, what are their objectives? Well, their objectives of field artillery are to destroy, neutralize, or suppress the enemy with integrated fires to enable the maneuver, right, to dominate unified land ops. So they have these 5 requirements for accurate fire. I make sure that these things are included in my usability testing, right? Do they have an accurate target location and size, an accurate firing unit location, accurate weapon and ammo information? Do they have accurate meteorological data and accurate computational procedures, right? Those accurate computational procedures, really require strict adherence to continuous independent checks. So that's just part of fire mission processing. Like I explained to you how it goes up to each echelon until it's finally approved. Those are all those independent checks being made during the process. So now I include that in there. Now this is just really quickly, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is kind of my evolving iterative user feedback process for collecting usability data. I needed to have a process to share with all our new government vendors because they were not familiar with doing usability at all. We're using the DevCom C5 ISR and DevCom Armament Center. They are actually building some of our software for us for the MVPs. And even though they are all, civilians, they just never did this kind of user testing. So basically I say you can start here. You can use wireframes or operational software. Depending on what you use, you can conduct a focus group or do a usability test or do a mixed, like we're doing mixed on our next, one of our next STPs. We're going to have, not quite hands-on, but we're going to have a demo for the soldiers to interact with at the end of the session. It's going to be highly canned data and not totally working. It's like one of the first demos coming out of this software. So they're really going to demo it to collect feedback, but they're going to give them a chance to have a little hands-on at the end. So a mixed session. And then identify, schedule our target users to participate, develop our test plans, materials. We do a pilot test, modify materials as needed. We conduct the usability tests, then we take all that qualitative and quantitative data, consolidate it, and we analyze those results and we report them. And then we vet the results. Now, for some groups, this is where things get kind of dicey and take a long time. And really, if everybody's involved in the process, like I mentioned before, it took us 45 minutes to get through 34 issues. But we all have to understand what they are, and we have to understand the software. So when we vet our feedback, we accept them, so they get assigned to the backlog. We say, oh, pending, we need more information. So we're going to collect more data during, say, the next usability tests. Or we may do an online survey to get more data. Or we may do a lit search to get more data. It all depends on what the issue is. We can say, hey, we resolved it. It was a previous issue. The design implementation was implemented. We retested it, and it's fixed. No issues. Everybody got through it, 85%. All our targets were met. So we say, okay, that's done. Or we reject it. There's a good reason not to implement that feedback. And then for the ones that go forward, I track the design changes and the implementation of them in that HSI tracker. For these other that we're looking for more information about, I will insert questions specific to them in the usability test materials, what we call the participant packet. I insert them in there so we can get that data. And then we return to start because software is never done. So in the beginning, when we're coming up with our plan, we want to determine what usability type is. And here you see some different types. It could be formative, comparative. Comparative is kind of like an A/B testing, and then summative. So formative is really what we're doing while we're wanting to know what changes need to be made in real time and we're implementing them in design. Comparative, we have two features or two designs that we want to see which is the best, or maybe take the best from both and come up with a third alternative design. Summative is more, well, how did we do? This is more like I think about okay, we're going to operational test to ATEC. How did we do? Give me those results. All right, so most of my work is formative and comparative, right? When I put my ATEC hat on, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier. So I work for the PM, but also I work for ATEC. So I wear two hats. So when I work for the PM, I work for the PM, right? And all my results and everything goes to ATEC and DOT&E and stakeholders, whoever asks for it. But when I work for ATEC, I only work for ATEC. PM does not get that information unless they get it through ATEC. And so I work closely with AEC, ATEC AEC, and what data they want collected. This is not my event. I work for them. So I collect what they want me to collect. And if I happen to collect some other stuff on the side, that's okay too. Because some things I just wonder about, And so it's nice to be able to have that flexibility to do that. Also, it enables me to kind of to talk softly and carry a big stick in a way, because I can tell my vendors that right now I'm telling you this is what the users say, these are the changes we need to make. I'm also telling you that I wear two hats. I'm telling you this now, working for the PM, but when I work for ATEC, I know what to look for when we're out there at that test event. If you haven't fixed these issues, I know they're there, and I will make sure I look for data to find out if they're still present now, and I will report it. So that is a huge advantage, I think. Plus, it just helps me close that whole cycle of getting to see the system used in real operation, which I don't typically get to see. Let's see. So identify the users, right? We know who our users are and what systems they use. We identify the tasks. We organize them into realistic operational scenario. We deconstruct them step by step. What is the information needed to perform them? And we make sure the system databases and all the information needed at that level, admin kind of level, is in the system, set up for use in our usability tests according to our scenario. We also identify the unique GUI elements and collect targeted feedback on them the first time the user interacts with them in the system. We develop the materials, which are a participant packet, a facilitator guide. Here you see the graphical user interface or GUI overview. We don't give any training. I literally, I'm sorry the virtual attendees can't see this, but what I have here is the user guide, right? This is what I go over. And I basically say, this is the ATAC toolbar, the Android Tactical Assault Kit toolbar. This is theirs. I say, here's our Precision Fire's dismounted icon or mounted icon, whichever system we're testing. Oh, and that's a nice thing about those two systems. It's the same, almost the same exact software. So if you're in a light unit and you're using Precision Fire's dismounted, and then you go to a heavy unit where you're using Precision Fire's mounted, you won't have to learn anything new. They're the same system. I feel like this is just such an incredible, I mean, it seems obvious, but I think it's just incredible that we've done that. So what I'm doing right now is I am trying to set up my system. There we go. So I'm setting up a Precision Fire's dismounted right now so I can pass it around and let people play with it. It has a couple of those acknowledge menus as well. So, all right, so I just put myself on the map because we are not connected to GPS. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass this around. And if you'd like, I have it already set up to Precision Fire's dismounted. And if you want, you can go ahead and try to figure out how to change your call sign. Right now, it's just a number. All right, if you're government, you have to do your Human Protection Program research determination request. Since I always did that, I did that for 21 years. I don't do that anymore, but I know how to do it. So I still adhere to all the guidelines for human protection. I think that's very important. I create a test plan and overviews that I use to solicit volunteers, and I obtain the volunteers and handle the logistics with my points of contact in the unit. Identifying tasks. So I look at the HSI tracker and I see which issues we still need to collect data on, right? And then I create tasks shown in the usability test task list with traceability to the HSI tracker. So I say, if we do these tasks, these are the issues we're going to cover in the tracker. So I have traceability back and forth. So if you log in, launch, and begin initial system setup, you're going to hit issue 88, which is they had trouble finding in range of filter, and issue 128, easy to find a equals filter, and issue 158, easy to find headings, like a target block. So I make sure that the task includes all of that. And I go through, and typically when we're first starting out, you can all the usability tests take 3 hours. That's all I do, 3 hours, because soldiers start work at 9:30. Our first session is 9:30 to 12:30, and people like to travel with me because they don't get lunch. No, I'm kidding, but they don't get lunch. And then our next session is at 1300 to 1600. So 3 hours and 3 hours. And all right, let's see. Why did I go off on that tangent? I'm not quite sure. But anyway, that is the structure that we work in. I have an example here, a comparative A/B testing within a usability test. The HSI concern was to eliminate fratricide. So we wanted, the developer created a task flow to create a fire support coordination measure, also called a geometry, called a no fire area. So the forward observer would want to create this no fire area around him. So no munitions come in this area, right? Perfect. What's the best way to create that? So the way systems have typically done it is they say, okay, tell me what shape. What shape is it? Is it a rectangle, irregular, circular, polygon, what? And then you pick a shape and it'll down select to the fire support coordination measures that are applicable to that shape. So you have to know the shape, and for some of them, it's just not intuitive that by the name what the shape would be. So for some less frequently used, it's difficult to recall. And there's not like there's a book you can go to look this stuff up. So we thought, well, maybe what we should do is put the label first. And so that way I say, I want to know fire area. And then, okay, the shapes come up. If there are multiple shapes applicable, then, you pick it. Otherwise, the shape is shown. So the developer said, well, what if? So we were doing some usability testing. It wasn't quite clear that one was preferred over the other, but we were finding again that users like to tailor things. They like to choose what they want to choose, right? So then he came up with another choice where, hey, you can pick the label first or you can pick the shape first, up to you. So he put that in a prototype system, and we did some A/B testing within the normal usability test. About halfway through, we asked them, hey, go and do this test now. And on this system, on this piece of hardware, and we collected data for that. And we found that, lo and behold, maybe as we expected, they like to be able to choose, right? Users like choice. So that's just one example there. All right, now to get into some of the nitty-gritty about the facilitator guide. So here we are, not that long ago, and I'll be doing this again next week. For Precision Fires Mounted, we get together, the developers, I get together with the development team, and there you see Sergeant First Class DeWitt. He was assigned to us as well, and he's actually a 13 Fox. And he helps me. I've trained him on how to conduct a bunch of these STPs, different types. And he's a data collector too, but right now he went to tactical radios, so I don't think he's going to be available anymore for me. But anyway, regardless, we get together and this is what we do. We come up with this list of tasks. I already have that initial task list, right? And I work with the developers to make sure this task list makes sense and they have all the right capabilities developed for it to support it. So we list everything out here, and then we identify what we want them to do at a really high level. Okay, user, I want you to log in. They need information in order to do that. So we tell them, here's your user ID, your username, and here's your password. All right? Then we tell them what to do next. But we're not telling them how to do these things. We're just saying, this is what we want you to do. It's up to you to figure out how to do it. That's how the whole facilitator guide is set up. Now, on the other side, underneath the photo, you see these are all the actual steps in order that you need to conduct in order to do this task. All right. So what it does, having this all spelled out like this, is we all have a common framework for when a user identifies an issue with something. We can go to this and we can say, oh, they had issue with tapping the filter. Which filter? Oh, the in range of. Oh no, a different filter. So we can specify. We can really specify now. And the other thing it gives us is people are not always. All my data collectors are not always familiar with the system. And this way, they always know what the steps are in order to accomplish a task. So they're not lost. And after you run a couple subjects, you know the system already. Now, the participant packet, you'll see the participant packet, the first page looks just like the facilitator guide's first page, right? It's the tasks, the information you need to conduct them. Now, on the other side are the questions we ask them for this task. When they're done with this task, they go over here and they say, this is going to be really hard for me to read, but did you know how to get, this is a very important first question to always ask. Did you know how to get started on the task? When we have usability issues, that is usually the first place it's going to turn up, is they didn't know what icon to pick, what the label was, where to go. So that is always a very first important question to ask. And then we ask them all the steps in that task. Could you log in? Did you understand? I can't read these things. And how to react to the startup notifications. We go through. And then the first time they use a hamburger menu, for example, we ask them, how was it? Was it easy to use that hamburger menu? So all these little unique GUI elements that they encounter in this task, we ask them about them. We also ask them, so for example, in previous usability tests, we found out that it was hard to find headings. If you get to see that and you see that the text in there, per ATAC GUI style guide standards, everything is white on a black background. And it's really hard sometimes to differentiate what's a heading and what's not a heading. So users just skim through the page very quickly and they think they don't know where they are. They're on the right page, they just don't realize it, and they start clicking around, right? So we ask them about that right here. We'll have a couple of tasks that ask them to go and use these headings, and then we'll ask them, how easy was it to find a target block? How easy was it to find an observer ID? So those things that are headings. More pages in the participant packet. So here's our consent form, demographics questionnaire, and then we also, I look at all the tasks that we have in this usability test session, and I think about, are there corollary tasks they would have experience with, either in the commercial world or in the military world, using some other equipment? And these questions are designed to find that out, how much experience they already have with some similar task. So we've been finding that some of our icons are difficult to understand. So what I did is I did an icon identification and memorability task. I put the icons on the left column. After they had their intro, they completed the first task. They even did some exploratory, moving around the user interface. With one task here, they have exploratory time, or no, they hadn't done exploratory. Okay, this is task 3. So they hadn't done exploratory yet. They just had done the first task and the second task. So they had some exposure, plus I went over the GUI overview, right? Now we're asking them, tell me what you think these icons mean. All right, and then after they were done with the complete test, we asked them again, now what do these icons mean? And we identified the ones that really need some help with redesign. I didn't always have an exploratory time built into the usability test. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, but lately soldiers have really asked for the exploratory time. So we've included that. Since they don't have any training, they like to just click around. So once they have the system set up by performing the first 2 tasks, Now they're free to go ahead and click around. They won't hurt anything. So we let them explore for 10 to 15 minutes, however long they want, up to 15 minutes. Another thing, the system has some embedded help content, and we wanted to get a little bit of feedback to make sure that users understand it. So rather than have them look at it on the device, we just wanted them to quickly read it. So we printed it out on a page, and they edited it and told us what needed to be changed. It was nice because they could edit right on the paper. Then we have the post-test questionnaire. And as I was talking before, we've shortened that up a lot. And then the SUS, the TAM, and then our exit interview, we always end with, what did you like the most? And we use an exhaustive technique. So we keep asking them until they finally say, I can't think of anything else. We do the same thing, what did you dislike the most? And then finally we ask for that advice that they have for us. So I think our participant packet, facilitator guide enable us to have consistent data collection across all our facilitators. We typically do this face-to-face, one-on-one. For this particular system, we're conducting 2 in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. So there's me and the system engineer generally, or when the system engineer gets called away, the developers, I've trained them how to collect data, and they also have done it. We have done this virtually over Teams and using Novi Survey, but we don't prefer it. They don't have actual hands-on. They have to walk us through it. They have to tell the person on the other end with the virtual machine what to press. Well, in some ways it's nice because you really, you know what they're thinking mostly the whole time. That's a lot easier to get at. But nobody likes it. Nobody prefers it. They really want hands-on. So we just did that during the pandemic, and now we've switched back to face-to-face. So you read the usability literature, and you'll see that, oh, you should have 5 participants in your usability test. That will get you 80% of the problems that will be identified. Well, that would be nice, but that has not been my experience at all. So I like 16 to 20 people to participate in a usability test. Right now, we're kind of breaking it up a little and doing 8 users in a BFIST unit, 8 users in a striker unit for precision fires mounted. So you end up with a little bit lower end than I like each time. So we end up basically with more one-offs than you might get otherwise. Some of those one-offs might actually be issues if more people said they were an issue. But since we look at it all anyway, I'm not too concerned about it, and I'll show you that in a minute. The way the session goes is introductions. I tell them an overview. They fill out the consent form and demographics questionnaire. We do the 5 to 10 minutes of that GUI overview. I talk about how important the ease of use and cognitive workload ratings are. Tell them what's unacceptable, that if they mark things acceptable, what they see now is what they're going to get in the field, that the only way to make a change is to tell us something is not acceptable and then to tell us why and make a suggestion on how we could improve it. Like I mentioned earlier, I recommend doing four social touch points like this a year, and that's pretty much what we've been doing. Let's see. And, I mentioned earlier, usually about 10 to 12 tasks in the beginning. Right now, we're up to 17 tasks, which is amazing to complete in 3 hours, plus all the other stuff we also do in that 3 hours, the explanations and all that, and the filling out the survey. So this is pretty good. And then, as I mentioned, we do the post-test questionnaires, interview, thanks, and brief. So here you can see kind of how we lay out. In the top picture on the top, we're all very close to each other. And it's one-on-one, and it's a lot of discussion. It's a lot of talking. If we never let them go more than 3 minutes being stuck on any step because we don't want them to get frustrated. If they go 3 minutes or anywhere close, you can see them getting frustrated. We just count it against the system. That step in that task failed. And then we ask why and what would have made it better. A lot of our work is making what's invisible in their heads visible to us so we understand how to fix things. And then we report results. So quantitative data, demographics, ratings, easy use, all of that, and task completion time. Now, here's something interesting. We collect task completion time, but the task completion time includes all of our discussion, right? It's from when they start the test to when it's done. So it has all that discussion. If they got stuck, any of that, that's all in there. So really all we expect to find over time is that this discussion time will go down, so they'll get through the task faster. So we do expect just to see a downward trend. To get real task time completion data, the way I do that is the new equipment training team has the systems, and I ask them to compete for the best time. So they'll do 3 trials each, and then I take the mean of that. And that, I say, is representative of an expert using the system. So I could compare these times to that and see how we're doing. So for qualitative data, there's been some of my data collectors in the past who aren't really good with the keyboard and don't want to type up the results and type what the soldiers are telling them in real time. That's how my data collectors now all want to do it. But back in the day, not everybody wanted to do it that way. So they could use the facilitator guide to indicate everything and write their comments on that. And we just put more time into that form, more blank space in that form so they could write those details down. So this is just an example from Excel on what the qualitative data looks like in the spreadsheet. I put the SUS and TAM comments too. So for all the SUS and TAM questions, if they didn't get an acceptable rating above the mean in those scales, we ask them why. So I also have all that in here so I can understand why. Sometimes it's the question that they don't understand, like, okay, will you want to use this system in the future? There's a question, something like that. And then they'll say no, and they'll mark it really low. And that just kind of affected your SUS score, right? And the reason? Because I'm getting out of the Army in a year, and this system probably won't be fielded. Oh. So it's good to understand why they rated things the way they rated them. So this method that we use is really designed for speed. As soon as I get home, everybody's going to want results, right? What are the results? What are the results? So the way this works is when we go back to our room at night, well, they've given me all the surveys, so I enter all that data into SPSS. And then my data collectors go back and they clean up their Excel spreadsheet with all their feedback in it, because there's going to be typos and things like that. So they clean that up, which then they send to me. So by the time I go home, I already have all my quantitative, all my survey data entered. And then they give me all their qualitative data, and I just put it all into one Excel spreadsheet. So then I can see all the requests for assistance are by task and step, and I can see where they fail. So the method is designed to be quick, so we can get the results out as quickly as possible. So this is an example, and actually I have some other examples up here in the front. And you can see that this is pretty much how I do it. Compare the results against the usability target, right? So here you go. Know how to get started on this task. Use always the first question, right? And well, that 90, so easy use, 90% of them say rated it acceptable. Up 80, that one failed. And then no assistance needed. Nobody needed assistance, but the cognitive workload failed. So when they're rated it that way on their questionnaire, we asked them, why did they rate it that way? what's the root cause, and what is your suggested mitigation? So I have all that data, and I just go back to that data and I pull that out for those 20% of people who have problem there. And I say, these were the issues, and these are suggested mitigations. Their suggested mitigations are really good. Sometimes we implement them, but sometimes the team, and especially the software developers, have a much more elegant way to solve the problem that will solve this problem and maybe other problems that we haven't even tested for yet. So always good to have everybody's head together working on this and coming up with the best possible solution. Whatever that solution is, we always do retest after implementation. Now, another thing about these percentages is that they actually show you the relative severity of the issues, right? So, for example, accurately enter meteorological data, they needed, that was only 35 of the people did not need assistance. Well, that's worse than, say, an 80 in the previous test. So you just get a little bit of relative comparison. Then we would show the screenshots to show where the issue was. And if I don't have time, I don't include the screenshots because they're really not easy to get off these systems. I have to take a picture and then I have to send it to myself. It's just, not easy, let's put it that way. So sometimes I don't, but sometimes I do. And because everybody knows the software so well now, I don't really need those pictures like I used to in the beginning. Let's see. And then like here, you see difficulty finding publish to map radio button. And so here you see what people said, and then an example of a one-off. So this one-off actually got changed. He wanted his observer ID. It wasn't available at a glance. And this soldier said, I would like it to be, available at a glance. So we added it to that box down at the bottom of the screen, and that's where your observer ID is. My last usability test, the 3rd ID Brigade Fire Support Officer came, as well as the brigade commander came and observed. And they really liked the method. And they wrote back to me, looking at the results, you were able to collect a lot more data than I expected in the short time each user was there. I'm impressed at the sheer number of conclusions you could make. So always happy when the people who sponsor us to go, conduct the usability test are happy with to see the results that we collect and then to see how we implement them later on. So this is usually a question I get asked, do you use the same soldiers over and over again, or do you get different soldiers? So by design, we get different soldiers usually each time. However, it has happened on occasion where we do have the same soldier come back for a second usability test. And people wonder, like, are there going to be, training effects? They already know the system. They're going to do better next time they see it, but that is not what we have experienced. After a few months, they've pretty much forgotten everything. So in the beginning, they had to create a fire support plan was one of our early usability tasks, and it was really hard to create a fire support plan. So after getting usability feedback, we improved it and improved it. And then the next time we went out with usability testing it, we had we had 2 repeat soldiers, and they both said, I saw this task coming up again, and I thought, oh, that was so hard last time. I don't remember why it was hard. I just remember, oh, that was really hard. And they said, now I just got it done. I don't even know why it was hard. So that is about the level of experience that holds over from usability test to usability test with no training, one experience, one exposure. So I don't find that a concern. Okay, so now I mentioned earlier about those 34 recommendations that came out of that usability test, right? So I broke it down this way. It's an issue we revisited. It's a new issue. It's a revisited one-off issue, or it's a new one-off issue that was identified. And then What happens is we might need more usability data. So these are kind of our our determinations from our vetting. More usability data is needed. Well, it was a revisited issue. There was one of those. And what happened was the user went to the mailbox instead of messages to access a free text. Now, one person did that. We've been doing this usability test now for a couple of years, and nobody else really had a problem with that. We don't want to reject that issue yet, but we're going to monitor it. All right. Then there was a new issue, difficulty finding add a tactical modem menu item. All right. We need more data. So now our next task. Our next test will also include this task to see if it comes up, because only one person identified that as an issue. There were 3 other issues identified, but only one person identified that issue. Oh no, that came up as an issue. Never mind. My bad. It was an issue one time, but we're not sure that do we really want to go forward with it. Let's do another usability test to make sure and really understand what the problem is. Here's a one-off. Time consuming to find specific messages. Somebody wanted to take all those 47 messages and put them in one big display in alphabetical order. Well, we need more data to support that. I don't think we're going to do that but we don't want to say no yet, because we do have favorites, and you can save your messages to favorites. And then another one-off where we need more usability data. Some people get confused between the ATAC menu on the left and our menu on the right. And this is just an example. And then you can see there are ones that need further design thought. Sometimes I have to go to the literature, like we wanted an emphasis color, and so I just did a lit search to find out, what would be the best emphasis color for our app, given the current colors it has and the context in which the system operates. So that's one example there. We may want to do an online survey. So I mentioned about all those icons. A few of them did not fare well in memorability or identification. So we're going to do another online survey. I did one initially for a whole bunch of icons. That was a few years ago. It's time to do another one. We may implement the design changes. And what's interesting here is we have, 8 new one-offs, and 8 of them actually got implemented now for design change, got added to the backlog. So we do consider even the one-offs, because sometimes they're really great ideas. And another thing is, of those one-offs, 4 of them were great ideas that the ACM is going to include in for future requirements later on down the road as we beef up the capabilities that we provide to our fire supporters. And sometimes we just reject. It's not a design issue, it's a software bug. So my job is not going out in usability finding software bugs, but we always find them. Why? Because our soldiers aren't following those nice golden path test threads. They just don't follow them. So we always find bugs. And that's nice why the software developers are there with us, because they annotate them usually. Usually they don't make them into my results. They'll annotate them and take them back and fix them. One interesting thing, so you saw that passing around the PFT, that it is an Android. And what we find is that more soldiers have Apple than have Android. It's just, how many of you have Apple? This may be different. How many have Android? Whoa! All right, you're not like our typical soldier then. So it's just the way it is, right? I went to Army Force Management College and did an HSI briefing for a few hours, and we were talking. They were concerned about Apple versus Android, and so I asked them the same thing. And there was only one person in the whole class of 30 that had Android. But anyway, there is a difference. There are some differences in the GUIs, and we are wondering, we are looking for what the differences are when we do this usability testing. And one thing we have found is that Android users don't really need any visual indication that something needs to be touched and held. They just do it. They must learn it along the way, right? But Apple users are looking for visual indications on how to do these things, that you need to press and hold something. That's not something we typically do on our Apple interfaces. So we do have a task, where we ask them to press and hold. For example, to add something to favorites, you just press and hold it. And then up pops, do you want to save this to favorites? Yes. It's that easy. But knowing that you have to press and hold it, our Apple users didn't know that. So we had to add a tooltip. Too easy, right? Add a tooltip. Press and hold to save to favorites, right? Oh, but it's in white font and everything on the screen is white. We go to the next usability test. They're still having problems. Why? They're not reading it. It just blends in, the tooltip. So then we had to change the tooltip to bright blue. And now, this last usability test, then they could do it. So sometimes it takes a few iterations to actually get to where you want to be. So I wonder, we learned so much from usability testing, right? What if we could make up GUI guidelines that, if we had only done this, we would not see this issue. So that's what we did. We came up with, if we display date and time shall be consistently displayed using a date-time calendar widget appropriate for task information, for example, 24 versus 12-hour clock, that would have gotten rid of some of the issues we saw in this one user interface. Here's another one. Fields shall auto-populate shared content for the same fields across workspaces. Don't make me enter things twice just because it's in different workspaces like some of our systems do right now. So anyway, these are just some of the things. We see the usability issue. We create this GUI requirement. But this would avoid them in the future. However, what we've learned is that it will actually require a user evaluation to determine whether or not this requirement was met. So we think it was met, but you really don't know until the user tests it to see if it was met. All right. So how do I track my progress in this dashboard? It really visualizes how well we're meeting our usability targets. So say from engineering release 1 to engineering release 2, this was the first usability test and the second usability test. Our usability issue count, for example, went down. And this is all fictitious data, but this is the kind of things you see. I plot the SUS scores against our target, the TAM. Then I look at all our issues. Are they medium, low, or high priority to mitigate them? And show that in a pie chart. Then I have the steps per task, and over iteration, we hope to see those number of steps go down as we streamline tasks. We look at time per task, and that's based on what the net team has come up for me. And then we track, as we implement mitigations, we track the ones that we've resolved over time by severity and status, and then task coverage. So right now I'm starting to create total tasks, a comprehensive list of all the tasks that will be performed for each one of these systems, so I can make sure that I have a good coverage and usability testing of all the tasks that the software is going to be used for. And then we just look at our progress overall. So, hey, in this usability test, 25% of the tasks were judged intuitive. They passed all the metrics, right? So 25% are good. Now the other 75% we have to work on. And really it gives us a sense of direction. It keeps us on track. And, it just, in the end, I think it'll help us ensure we have an intuitive user interface design. So it takes a team, really. I don't do anything alone. I'm just so grateful for all the people who work with me, and and it's fun because some of them want to go on and actually do human factors after this experience. I had one back in the tactical radios days. I had a safety engineer at General Dynamics. he was one of my data collectors when we were doing radio usability testing, and he actually left and went and got a degree in human factors because he wanted to do it. So it can happen. It's all good. And then we do some outreach. So at Human Factors, we did 2 usability workshops in 2017 and 2018. And here you see my teams pictured. We did a full day hands-on workshop of coming up with all these materials. And we had a variety of different systems you could use. We had like a UAV, one of those little copters. So you could do it that. You could do it with online. We had a shopping kind of experience. And we had infrared thermometers. Little did I know how popular they would become during the pandemic. So I already had my thermometer, tons of them. And so things like that. So we had a few different choices for people to select from. And then another thing I do is occasionally have some time on the weekends to do some writing. So we have a couple of articles about doing user-centered design in Soldier touch points and Soldier-centered Agile. And guys, that's all I have right now. Thank you very much. We are good for lunch, right? And if you have any questions, and the same thing for everybody online, you can enter them into the chat, and the moderator, the TA in the room will pass them on to me. Sorry you couldn't be here in person. We would have loved it.